Here's my honest review of the $140 7-course tasting menu at Baroo in Los Angeles. Baroo is a modern Korean restaurant in the Arts District known for fermentation and creative takes on Korean food. It is currently Michelin selected and is run by husband and wife team Wang and Mina Park. The menu is inspired by a continuous life cycle, with each of the 7 courses representing ideas such as birth, growth, decline, and renewal. I started with a delicious house-made tea to open up the palate before the tasting began. The first course is called Tay and it started with 4 small snacks. The first was BG, a soybean stew made with perilla pulp, perilla oil, and parsley oil. It was warm, earthy, and very comforting. This was actually my favorite of the 4 snacks. Next was the anchovy bugak, a crispy seaweed cracker covered in pumpkin and sunflower seeds. This was light and crunchy with a salty seafood flavor from the anchovy. The Korean fried chicken with gochujang sauce was okay, but it wasn't as memorable as the other snacks. And finally, the Dukgalbi Sulbang. This was Korean black sesame bread topped with truffle puree, kimchi jelly, shaved black truffle, and a beef patty. There was a lot packed into one small bite, but everything worked together without any single flavor completely taking over. This snack course gets a 9 out of 10. The second course is Yang. This was striped chuk with the Korean-style radish wrap that had been cooked in smoked anchovy dashi along with a fermented cherry sauce. This was fresh and light, but honestly the flavors felt very subtle. This gets a 7 out of 10. Next is Saeng, with featured sole, scallop, crab, and prawn topped with chrysanthemum foam and an edible blossom on top. It also came with a separate piece of seaweed battered sole served over seaweed aioli.
Very comforting. I like the warm feeling that it gives you.
The seafood inside the bowl was delicate, but the broth and foam made the entire dish feel warm and comforting.
This fish is really delicate and flaky.
Alternating between the two was a great recommendation because you get something warm and comforting from the bowl, followed by something crispy and salty from the fried sole. This course gets a 10 out of 10. Next is Day, featuring grilled black cod, and underneath were celeriac and fermented black bean sauce. It was also finished with chive oil, Korean sancho pepper oil, and crispy buckwheat for texture. The other ingredients also made it very rich, buttery, and savory. This was one of my favorite courses and gets a 10 out of 10.
Definitely one of the softest fish I've ever tasted.
The main course is called Wang, and you can choose between the pork collar and beef short rib. The pork collar is served with a squash blossom mandu and kimchi rendoinju. The pork was cooked well, but honestly it felt pretty average. I definitely wouldn't recommend choosing this over the short rib. The pork collar gets a 7 out of 10. The other option was the brand beef short rib with beef and burdock ju. This was significantly better.
This is definitely one of the best short ribs I've ever had.
The short rib was incredibly tender and rich, while the ju intensified the beef flavor without making the dish feel too heavy. The beef short rib gets a 10 out of 10. Next is Byung, a wild mountain greens rice with perilla jangaji and gamtae bugak. This was very earthy, which makes sense considering how many greens and herbs were used. It was in the flashiest course, but it was deeply savory and comforting. This gets a 10 out of 10. And finally, the dessert course is called Jeol. This had strawberry sorbet, pistachio cream, and hazelnut crumble topped with a macchioli butter cookie on top. It also came with a fresh seasonal plum from Wang Family Farms that the chef wanted everyone to try. The dessert had a great combination of creamy, crunchy, sweet, and tart textures. But the fresh plum might have been the best part. It was incredibly juicy and tasted like it had been picked at exactly the right time. This gets a 10 out of 10. Overall, the food at Baroo was phenomenal. However, I still left pretty hungry after finishing the entire tasting menu. There were quite a few optional supplements offered. I didn't add any, and I felt like the base menu could have been more substantial on its own. I don't expect to leave a tasting menu completely stuffed, but I do expect to feel satisfied. At $140 before any supplements, I think the 7-course experience should feel complete without needing additional dishes. Based only on the quality and creativity of the food, Baroo will score a 9 or 10, but considering the portion sizes and the fact that I left hungry, the overall experience gets an 8 out of 10.